This time, we get to hear from the great Kahan, Shaul Hawkins. Shabbat Shalom! Praise Yahweh! You may be seated, brothers and sisters. Welcome home! Praise Yahweh, and welcome to the great feast of unleavened bread 2010, the greatest feast in the 6,000-year history of mankind. Praise Yahweh. Well, I had a question for you. What day of the Omar is it? Zero. Praise Yahweh. Remember, it starts tomorrow after the Sabbath. Tomorrow is the first day of the Omar. We're already preparing for the great feast of Pentecost. Everything's always looking ahead in Yahweh's house. Here, preparing. It's a house of preparation, preparing us for this great kingdom that is soon to be established. And Yahweh has called each one of us here and opened the door for each one who is here at this time. And believe me, brethren, there are many, many, many at this time that were trying to get here for this feast, but were held back by their governments and by these nations, held prisoner. But it will not be long, and they will be released. And you're going to see, we're going to need a building to house at least 20,000 very soon here. Praise Yahweh. But Yahweh's called us here to His house, to the one sent, to the one that He sent, and He set a table before us here to offer us salvation. Yes, salvation. Because if it wasn't salvation that we're seeking here, the only alternative is eternal death. And this is a very serious matter. Yes, we're rejoicing in this, but there's many things that we need to take seriously and put our full hearts and minds and beings into. Okay? We've got to get our hearts and minds on this salvation. Do you realize that's what the very name Yeshua means? Yeshua, it means Yahweh will save His people from their sins. So notice, that's what salvation is. The world, I don't know what they think salvation is, a big bank account, or, fancy cars and homes, and I don't know what they think it means. Drunkenness, some of them, drugs. Others think that's what salvation is. But it's being saved from our sins, because sin brings the death penalty. But remember, the world teaches you have an immortal soul. You're going to live forever. You don't have to worry about it. You see how that deception subtly crept in there? That you don't even have to worry about it. You've already you're going to live forever, as a gassy being on a cloud somewhere, or who knows, or you'll come back as an animal, or whatever they teach. But you're going to live forever anyways. They don't even realize, they don't know what a sin is, and they don't know the results of sin, but they're starting to feel it, all right, in their lives. They're starting to go through these curses, unexplained curses, in their bodies, and sickness and disease, and pain and suffering. They still haven't fully linked it to their own sins. Oh, maybe it was somebody else that sinned and set off a bomb somewhere that caused the trouble, like we saw just the other day here. And you're going to see the revenge. Remember, Mary is going to make war against the Muslim people. And so they set it up, making it look like, well, what is a Muslim? Well, that's somebody that blows up the subway. Okay? And this is how they're going to come against everyone that won't worship Mother Mary. But anyway, Yahweh is offering us salvation. And He opened our mind to understanding, look, we got to get away from our sins. So how do you do it? It's called conversion. Conversion to Yahweh's laws. Just as we read in Acts 3:19, repent and be converted. It's not enough to say, well, I'm sorry I did that. You've got to put the full effort into converting. But how does He do it? How do we learn of His laws? They've been in the Bible for since 1611? They had an English Bible, I think, or some around there. I don't know if any of you are still alive from then or remember that, but King James put it in English back in 1611, messed it all up, put words in there that Didn't mean what the Hebrew meant. But they've had these in writing, and they didn't yet have salvation, remember the prophets told us. They didn't have it. But we all spent our life on sin, and we deserved death. And so we owed our life, and we needed someone to buy it back. We needed someone to pay that death penalty. And there's only one that could have done that. And that's why his name means Yahweh will save his people from their sins. And that was Yeshua Messiah, whose memorial we just celebrated. But the fact is, Yeshua had to die. He had to die. As painful and terrible as it was, and you think about the pain that he went through, and think about how the little we gripe and complain about a little discomfort in our life, or if we have a little pain here and there, and you think of the massive pain that he went through for people that he didn't even know. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about whether to build up Yahweh's house to be ready for 2 billion people or to build up your own house. Okay? Because Yeshua went through the terrible pain for us on our behalf as well. People that he knew would be there through prophecy in the future, but they didn't even know back then about this land over here in North America, the United States. A land not yet established. It would be Babylonish. And they knew the prophecies of it, but they only saw it in prophecy. But Yeshua fully believed without seeing, to the point that he was the only one left standing. The terrible trials that he had to go through, he had no one there to go through it with, just the knowledge that he got and put in his mind from the house of Yahweh, taught as a baby from the house of Yahweh, and he believed everything he was taught. He had no doubt. Brethren, if you have any doubt or question about the doctrine of the house of Yahweh at this point, the fact is you simply are not believing the one sent. You're not believing. Now compare that with the yardstick of Yeshua, who's the perfect reflection of Yahweh, who is the standard of perfection, his laws, and who Israel Hawkins is bringing forth at this time, the only one bringing it forth. But we needed that Passover lamb, and there is no need for another Passover lamb. Brethren, this is ridiculous. This is deception of the Pharisees, because they don't want to believe the lamb that Yahweh sent. And they don't want to believe his teachings. And they don't want to believe what he prophesied about the last day's work. So what is required of us? What is required of us for salvation? Well, it's conversion. Okay? Now, how do you learn Yahweh's laws? Turn over to Romans 10. We're going to have to go rather quickly through some of these scriptures here. But write this down. Romans 10, 13 through 16. You can go on to 17, or you can go on to the whole chapter there, really. But we'll focus on these few scriptures here. For whoever calls with the name of Yahweh will be saved. Well, many they'll say the name Yahweh. Is that what he means? No, Timothy tells you, whoever calls with the name of Yahweh, whoever's accounted to truly call with it, departs from iniquity. Well, how? Well, how then can they call upon him whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him of whom they had not heard? Notice, you have to hear of it also. It was not enough to have the King James Version. Remember, Zechariah 8. There was no reward, salvation for man, because the ones from whom they would hear were silent. They were silent because they hadn't been born yet. And not that they didn't want to preach. But anyways, how will they hear without a preacher? Wow, there's so many preachers. Wow, everybody ought to hear about it by now. Anybody can go out. walk into a church, volunteer your services, and say, hey, look, I can preach. You want to hire me on? You know, is that how it goes? No. How can they preach unless they are sent? They must be sent. Now, please keep all the pastor's sermons from the past few weeks in your mind. As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the message of peace, who bring glad tidings of righteous things. But notice, they have not all obeyed the message. Now, he's not speaking of those who didn't hear it, who weren't called out by Yahweh to hear it. He's talking about people who sat here and listened to it and refused to believe it. And this is very dangerous, brethren, and I beg of you, if this is you, please get your nose in the House of Yahweh literature. We'll cover that in a minute, but get your nose in these books and get your heart and mind humbled. Humbled. Yes, it's probably the hardest thing that a man can do, man, woman, or child brought up in this world, is to humble themselves. Because ain't nobody going to tell me what to do, right? Do you know that's what you were taught fully? And being taught if you're still exposing yourself to this world? Now, in Yachanan 6:44, this ties right back in with Yeshua, the one sent, who is Israel. He's the only one sent. And if you're here sitting in this room, Yahweh desperately wants you to fully understand and accept this. Your forward progress is stopped if you can't understand it. You will never move ahead toward the kingdom. You're not getting even through the gate, into the gate, if you can't get past that. But it says, no man can come to me unless the Father who has sent me draws him, and I will establish him as a priest at the last day. Well, how do you come to Yeshua? All right, the world teaches, you just, come right to the Savior. You go straight to the Savior. Only they call him Jesus. Yes, maybe you can go straight to Jesus. If that's what you want in your life. If you want to go back to what you vomited, that's fine. But the only way to be bought back by Yeshua's death and have your sins paid for is to be drawn to the one sent. Remember, Yeshua is at the right hand of Yahweh. Now, if you can get up there to him, more power to you. But you can't. They're not even with the best rocket ship they got. Now, Yeshua is the high priest over the house of Yahweh, as Hebrews 10 tells us. And in the prophecies in Revelation, he shows that he is in the midst of the lampstand. The works of Yahweh, the only light in the world, is shown as a 7-lamp lampstand. There's only one lamp left burning at this time that Yeshua has anything to do with. It's the only light he has anything to do with. And can you guess who that is? Israel Hawkins. And then in Isaiah 49:6, we see, turn there if you will, Isaiah 49:6. We see that Israel is given as a light to the Gentiles. In this time period, he's the only light. He's the only source of knowledge of the laws of Yahweh. And every prophet agrees with it. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to disagree with the prophets and be accepted by Yahweh or Yeshua at all. That's not being drawn to Yeshua if you disagree with the prophets, because Yeshua said the prophets spoke of him. And he was in complete agreement with the prophets. And then, so you may be my salvation. Yes, the only way to get salvation in these last days is to go to Israel Hawkins and believe everything he tells you. And in 1 Corinthians 4, and this is the same pattern that was always followed, we see that the apostle Shaul begot, now this was after he repented and converted. He says in verse 15, although you may have 10,000 teachers in Yeshua, and then we may get that many kahans before this is over, yet you do not have many fathers. For in Yeshua Messiah I have begotten you through the message. Therefore I plead with you, be you followers of me. Yes, we must follow Israel Hawkins if we want salvation. That's what Isaiah was saying. That's what Isaiah 44:3 says. Yahweh would pour His Spirit upon Israel's seed and offspring only. Only. There's not another work, as Amos says. In the house of Yahweh, you may not believe it now, but you need to believe it. The house of Yahweh preaches the very same message that was preached by Abel at the very first house of Yahweh. The very same message that all the prophets and the patriarchs and the apostles and Yeshua taught. It's never changed. It's never changed. Brethren, we must believe this in order to have salvation. Now I want to turn from here for a minute and look at we've seen that's the pattern of Yahweh, but I want to just look briefly at the pattern of the world. Because we live in a dangerous world. Not only the physical diseases and the food that's defiled and so on, but dangerous to your salvation. Dangerous ideas floating around there called deception. And Daniel faced this. The prophet Daniel, when he was young, forgot to write the verse down here. Yeah, here it is in Daniel 1 verse 4. In Daniel's day, here they arrested these, took them captive, large groups. Remember, Pastor brought this out. Hauled them off to Babylon in captivity. And notice they wanted children in whom there was no blemish, but handsome, gifted in knowledge and wisdom, quick to learn and understand. Notice whom they could teach the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Now, a lot has changed since Daniel's day, because back then they had to actually haul you off away from the house of Yahweh to teach you their literature. Today, brethren, we got it being pumped into our homes. And many of you are paying to have it pumped into your homes. The internet, TV, anything on the internet other than IsraelHawkins.com or Yahweh.com, you're putting yourself, or your children especially, in grave danger. Any other TV shows other than the Yahweh broadcast on the Galaxy satellite and the Hotbird satellites if you live overseas. You're putting your children in grave danger. They had to actually kidnap Daniel, but they don't have to kidnap your children if you put them in front of the TV or let them get on the internet. Brethren, please think about this, because it's putting in their literature, which is the sum total of their way of life. The subtly teaching that you don't have to listen to anybody. They're putting the subtle teaching of homosexuality and bestiality into your children's minds. And you don't even realize it. Maybe you do realize it, and you've cut it off. But please, don't expose the children to this. We even prayed to Yahweh last night to put a hedge. What benefit is a hedge around your house if inside your house there's a pipeline full of vomit and filth and dung coming in? The sewer is supposed to go out, not back in, okay? Praise Yahweh. Well, brethren, and if you think, well, what else can we do? There is no lack. Here's just a little bit of the literature, and we've seen stacks of it up here. But please avail yourself of these newsletters and prophetic words. There is so much knowledge crammed in there, I guarantee you won't have time to fully read and digest it this feast. But when you get back home and you're sitting around with nothing to do but turn on the tube or log on to the internet for a Babylonish literature session, stop it, and put this literature of Yahweh in your mind. Also the 9th book of Israel. Okay, you see that? Compare the previous one. The Orange Buffalo, beautiful, beautiful book with the message of life. Brethren, the only message. But you must study it. You must spend time with it to get salvation. You just can't give it lip service and glance at it now and then and think, yeah, I know that, but look, I'm so much smarter than this now. Let me move on to bigger and better things. No, if you do that, you're falling into the trap that in Galatians 1:9 and 2 Thessalonians 2:2 wrote about. You'll be letting someone else come along with a slightly different message because you didn't really study. You don't know. What's Israel Hawkins teaching up there lately? Wonder how I could find out. Well, hello, it's pumped to you through your mailbox if you lived out of town. It's on the internet. If you want to use the internet righteously, you can get it all. Okay? Don't neglect these things, brethren. Please. Remember, it's your salvation. You came here for salvation. You didn't come here for a social club or to hang out. And you certainly didn't come here to drink this feast, praise Yahweh. And fill your minds with stupidity. You came here to get the knowledge of salvation. And it's readily and freely available. More than you can fill in a day. Here, if you spend all day, you couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of the knowledge. Now, I want to give an example here. I'm going to read a few things out of the 4th book of Israel. And I want to tell you, these sermons in here that I want to share with you, a few quotes, go back 24 years. All right? 24 years, these sermons on unity. What is unity? And believe me, if you're new or if you've never read or listened to these, and I say you're new if you weren't here in the sanctuary or in Abelin to hear these preached the first time. If you came after that, like I did, you're new. We're new here. So you need to go back and read these books because you're going to be amazed when you do, okay? Now, I had a few things... And I'll tell you, all these sermons, these first 7 chapters in the 4th book of Israel, you really owe it to yourself to read this. Now listen to what Pastor wrote here, or spoke. He was reading in 2 Kepha 2 about these ones that try to bring in false doctrine, and to whom the gloom of darkness is reserved forever. This is the way some people are. They can't stabilize themselves. They can't believe that Yahweh's house is a pillar and ground of the truth. They think that every Tom, Dick, and Harry who comes here, no matter whether his eyes are full of adultery or what, that he has something for them. Someone said, well, I think the house of Yahweh is made up of members here and there, and each one of them has a little bit of truth. And if you put them all together, then they're the pillar and ground of the truth. Now, Pastor Wright, now does that make any sense? No, that's confusion. That's Babylon. But he says that's the reasoning they come up with. And he says you have a bunch of nonsense and a bunch of errors. That's what the world is filled with. Yahweh says the house of Yahweh is the pillar and ground of the truth. We can't seem to get that through our heads for some reason. But this is the thinking that goes on. And he said, another part, he says, I brought a sermon on a certain subject that I had been studying for something like 25 years. I had filed information on it for years and years, and I finally knew I had the truth on the subject. You see, I just didn't start studying the Holy Scriptures yesterday. This has been a long-term thing with me. Anyway, this person said he got home the night after I gave that sermon and looked up one word and thought that changed the whole picture, and it led him into deception. You see how easy it is? Well, I was familiar with that word he looked up because I'd spent my lifetime studying this. I study it all out before I bring it to you. It's proven. It's the truth. It's the only doctrine of Yahweh. It is the word of Yahweh. Do you realize what you're saying to Yahweh when you call it into question? He says, this is a great example. I spent 25-something years studying this subject, and then someone spent 30 minutes studying it and turned around and told me I was wrong. All right, this is an unstable soul. Someone who tells Israel or tells his friends that Israel's wrong is an unstable soul. And remember, we're told to ask of Yahweh, and He will give to all liberally. Here it is, liberally. Generously is what it means. Completely generously, but ask without doubting. If you doubt or say He's wrong, you know what the apostle said you received from Yahweh? Nothing. Nothing. That's what Yahweh's going to hand you in your mind. A big bunch of nothing if you have doubt in your mind. So the first step, brethren, is to get rid of the doubt. There was a few more here. You know, it says about reasoning. Come, let us reason together, says Yahweh in Isaiah 1:18. Well, this is as far as they go in this scripture. Well, let me tell you the way Yahweh reasons. It's very plain. If you start with Genesis, you will see how Yahweh reasoned with Cain. Do you remember how He reasoned with Adam and Eve? He first showed them the right way and taught them the right way. That's what you were taught in the house of Yahweh when you first came here. You were taught the right way. Then they went and let Satan deceive them. Then what did Yahweh do? Did He say, well, I'm sorry I said anything to you about those laws. I can see that you felt this way in your heart, so you went and did this. It's all right. Go ahead and stay in the Garden of Eden. Is that what Yahweh said? Is that the way Yahweh reasons? No way. First, Yahweh tells you what is right and what is wrong. And we've been taught and showed. Do you realize that last night and the night before, we were taught and shown the only correct way to keep Yeshua's memorial in the Passover. If you think there's any other way, you got a mind like Cain right here. And you need to repent and humble yourself because you're acting like Cain. He says, then if you don't accept it, He sends preachers to try to explain it to you. Then if you still don't accept it, He allows you to leave the house. Leave it in your mind, meaning disagree with it. He'll let you disagree with it. But He begs you to come back in your mind. That's Yahweh's reasoning. Now I'm going to read you some out of the Yahweh's Passover booklet, because there was a few worldly fools, and yes, I'm not insulting them. That's what the Scripture calls them, fools. All right, that's a scriptural designation and category. It's officially established in the courts of heaven, if you will. Fool. All right, if you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken. And you know what the prophets spoke about the house of Yahweh in these last days. Well, they took a few things out of this booklet and tried to say that the house of Yahweh, like many organizations have done over the years, tried to say that the house of Yahweh was keeping the Passover wrong. All right? when last night you were fully taught. But the thing that they forgot to read in this booklet, let me read it to you here. And this booklet came out in the 80s. I got here in 88, and this booklet was already here. It says on page 5 in this booklet, and you can go and get one, I do not know of anyone, and I mean anyone, who is keeping Yahweh's Passover and Yeshua's memorial exactly according to the scriptural instructions Yahweh inspired to be written, except for the established house of Yahweh in these last days. And brethren, if I was going to put my own writing together on the Passover, that'd be the first thing I'd put. Not leave that part out. But remember, the Holy Scriptures on page 63 here, the Holy Scriptures plainly show that the Passover sacrifices were merely a representation or a shadow of the true sacrifice to come, Yeshua Messiah, our Passover sacrifice, as the Apostle Shaul said in 1 Corinthians 5:7, for truly Yeshua, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Brethren, please, we need to come into unity in order to receive salvation in this great and awesome kingdom that Yahweh has in store for us. Now, if everyone will please stand, it is my great honor and privilege, chomping at the bit here, to present to you the greatest teacher in the world, the only one Yahweh sent for these last days, Kahan Israel Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. May Yahweh bless you. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We got a lot to cover here before I got a lot to cover here before I start the sermon. Hopefully I'll get started here today. This new book is a must. Not only is it beautiful, but the contents in it brings you very much up to date with all the falsehoods that Christianity has put out for years. I think everyone knows that surely that there's thousands of mistakes in the King James Version, maybe tens of thousands. There's also thousands of mistakes in the last book of Yahweh. There's somewhat less mistakes in this one that we have now, and there'll be a lot less mistakes in the one that's coming very soon. The trials or tests that I told you about with Abraham, I would like for you to think on that just a little, because you're involved in the same test or the same honor. Yahweh is sometimes I think He doesn't give us these trials unless He knows we're capable of coming through them, in an honorable way. But Abraham, he knew that Abraham would do this, and therefore He placed this in front of him to give him honor. Now this is Yahweh giving him honor, but in Yahweh bringing this about, we give Abraham honor when we read it, because we see how dedicated, how devoted he was to Yahweh and His teaching, and how much he believed. He wasn't just a partial believer. He believed with all of his heart that Yahweh would do this. He didn't go off seeking churches for advice. He didn't go to someone else other than the leader of the House of Yahweh, Melchizedek, and say, should I do this? Like some of the others did. If you remember, some of the other prophets that Yahweh would send, and he'd say, go do a certain thing, and they would give in to someone else and not do it. And of course, this is a very evil thing, Yahweh shows, and his kingdom is being built not of those who go against the one sent, but those who believe into the one sent and perform that word. Would you have known this about this test if I hadn't have told you? Think about that. You don't have to answer me, but think about that, because Yahweh reveals these things in time through his house, through the one sent, as he says. And I'm not talking about just off the cuff talking. I'm thinking of all the things that Yahweh showed his house that he didn't show anybody else. And Yeshua said even the Malachim in heaven, he said they have really wanted to know these things that Yahweh reveals to his Malachim, to the one sent in these last days. And they have searched diligently, but they can't find out the answers. So when they hear this from Yahweh's house, coming from my lips and the lips of the priest here in the house of Yahweh, then they know that this is a great evidence to them that Yahweh is guiding his house, and not some spirit of Satan. Satan has so much deception that is so close to the house of Yahweh. But they're not the house of Yahweh. They're not the ones sent. So they can lead you wrong. We have several. We have some that tried to sue us and take the name away from us. The name House of Yahweh. They didn't even want it when Yahweh first established it. And then after we brought it out that this is it, this is what Yahweh's work has always been called, then they started wanting it for themselves to try to steal it from you at this time. But this honor that he is showing here, think of the trials that you're going through. I'll call them trials at this time, and what you've gone through in the last few years. Christianity don't go through this. They get out here and fight and kill each other, yes, but that's not trials and trying to overcome. The difference in us and Christianity is we are striving to overcome all sin and become perfect like the Savior, our teacher and high priest, and king over the house of Yahweh, the perfect life that he lives, which he did live a perfect life, and we're striving to overcome. The people that leave the house of Yahweh, they quit striving. So they get a relief from that. Christianity doesn't strive to be perfect. They lay all their sins on Jesus, while they fill their bodies with curses, of course. And they can't lay the curses on Jesus. He's dead, but they, he's still dead. When he died, he died. He won't be living anymore. I'm talking about the false saviors, of course, that came before Yeshua, and they're still being worshipped, but they can't help you. They're not helping Christianity at all. They're just the same old deception they're following. But Christianity is not burdened, so to speak, with these trials. But they're not proving anything to Yahweh. They won't have an opportunity to enter this first calling that comes like Abraham, as Yeshua quoted, though blessed are those who believe without seeing. And of course, this was Abraham. And the honor that Yahweh gave him there, he's also giving you if you overcome. When your corrected or told to do something. Now, you know, and you rise up in bitterness against this correction or against a job that's set for you to do. Now, believe me, this is either honor or dishonor that's going onto your record. And if you go and seek at Satan's deception, naturally you are going to be deceived. Now, if you overcome this, it will be counted to your honor. If you don't, you're going to be one of those that Yeshua said will die in their sins, because they would not believe the one sent. Now, it is that simple. They wouldn't believe, they wouldn't follow the house of Yahweh. The mistakes in the King James Version, we're bringing them out daily, weekly, in the house of Yahweh. The food that Yahweh has blessed us with, brethren, I can hardly wait for two men to bring you the information on this in this feast. And they have films, they have pictures, they have proof of the defilement of the food. Yahweh is making it possible for us to be self-sufficient, and I'm praising Him for it, because if you noticed, if you were blessed to see the film on Food Inc., as they called it, the food production and the antibiotics that's going into the foods, and of course before that the food was not being koshered anyway, and the blood Yahweh says contains the life, and of course here in the house of Yahweh, I've seen so many healings take place here. It would blow your mind if you could see it all taking place at one time. But even up the latest one last night, very I would call miraculous healing took place here in the sanctuary, and of one person. There might have been more than that, more than I heard of. But this is a beautiful thing that's taking place. But your health, the improvement of your health in following what Yahweh is bringing forth, and has been bringing forth now several years in His house. He's also given us a way to get around this, the poisons of this world, and of course the defilement of the animals that we eat. And people, they know so much about these animals now that they quit eating animals. And they said if it can't swim, you know, then they don't eat it. Well, now, I don't know if you saw the article or not, but before Passover, there's a group of rabbis that refused to pronounce as kosher certain fish that was loved and cherished for Passover. And I loved it when I saw the understanding that they had concerning the organs in a fish's body, and how, of course, this is taught in the Scripture and in the Hebrew words. It's not altogether taught in the King James Version or the English, but in the Hebrew words we find that the organs themselves that you take out of the animal, and Yahweh tells you which ones to take out, if you're with me now, on the clean and unclean, and what to eat of an animal, what animals to eat, and then what to eat of that animal. You take out these organs, although you also throw away parasites with it. You take out the blood, you throw away parasite. There's always been parasites because it's a needful thing for them to be there. What has not always been is the mixture, the mutations, the crossbreeding of the parasites. And this is what the rabbis have discovered in certain fish now, clean fish, that were able at one time, their organs were able at one time to take all this out of the fish, and you could find these parasites in the organs of the fish. The in studying the fish, there was, I believe it was 5 different things that the rabbis would look at the fish in the eye, and in the eyelid of the fish. I think it was 5 things in the eye, and then 7 things in the eyelid of the fish. Well, these things are also shown to us in the animals, the sheep, goats, and deer, and so forth. And if we look in the eye and we find these things, of course, we know that it's getting by the organs, and so they are defiled, and we won't use them, and we have to throw away a lot of meat. But I said, when the judge told the men that was establishing the butcher shop for us, the judge told them, don't butcher a sick animal. And I said, you stick with that law. This man now has been set as a judge for this purpose. He's an inspector, and he's been a judge, and so all over this part of Texas for so many years. I said, don't you ever serve a sick animal to one of our people. And they vowed that they would not. Well, anyway, now, the fish, well, they've never seen this before. But now the organs of certain fish that was cherished during Passover, they are now letting these, the organs of the fish is now letting these parasites, not the original parasites, it's letting them through too now, but these crossbreeds are getting by the organs and into the fish itself, so they're refusing to say that this is kosher for Passover. But see, if the things that they're not checking, and of course the world is checking because they know that they're getting sick from it, is the vegetables. And the vegetables, of course, they say their excuse was, well, this was raised next door to some cows. There's cows in another pasture. And apparently the wind blew some stuff over there from the cows. And of course this is all lies, and any farmer with any study at all in his background would know this is lies. But people are so gullible today, and they're so ignorant concerning food and farming. I'm so glad that I was raised on a farm, and I know sick animals when I can spot a sick animal at a distance, and I often do, and tell our men and call them and tell them what to look for, but they're all getting to where they can do the same thing. And there are certain signs that you look for that the Talmud gives a bunch of it. They don't give all that we know now, but I notice the Jews are growing, and I think this is some of the Hebrew people that Yahweh is calling that will one day be at Yahweh's house very soon, of the 12 tribes that he shows so many coming out of the world. But these new parasites that's creeping by, of course, they would get by a healthy organ. But they also know that the organs are becoming weakened from the overabundance of the defilement that's in the water now. So they're about to quit eating any fish at all. Well, that leaves them to the sick animals, of course, that walk the earth, and which they know they're sick, and they're striving to keep the people, happy, and with something to eat, with some meat to eat, because they don't want to go back to the wilderness where Yahweh fed them on dove or quail, and or on manna. But I'm thinking it may come to that before we get to this total end. And this is how bad the food is getting. Other people know it, and if you'll get that tape, or we could even play it during, if we have it, during the feast sometime in the afternoon, showing the production of food in order to make a lot of food and make it cheap. But it's really costing the public and sickness and disease and doctor bills and so forth. But anyway, when we tell you here when we tell you, don't go back out there and get this unkoshered meat. There's no kosher meat on the market out there that I know of at all. Nothing fit to eat. If there had been, I would have never invented a butcher shop in our house. I would have never wanted to start raising our own chickens or vegetables or so forth. But there is none out there. Now, this is a trial for you. But it's also honor to you, because what is being written about you in the book of in heaven at this time, and there is a record being written about you. That is what this is about. It's also in a little bone in the back of your head. The record of it is there, which Yahweh says can be seen in your face. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about, being seen in the face. You can also see it in the face if you know what to look for. In the animal or in fish, in chickens. Chickens are very hard to get by this protective system that they got. Because they were made to eat anything and everything, and they do. But there are certain things now that are getting by, especially when you put it in their feed, the antibiotics and so forth, that's going into their meat. And I want you to know what antibiotics are. And what they come from, what they're made from. So you'll understand what we're dealing with in this time period that mankind wasn't dealing with in Israel, thousands of years ago. They weren't, or in the wilderness, but we're dealing with it now. They are the same poisons that's come from what Yahweh told them to guard against back then, but they're in a superabundant way at this time and mutated at this time to where they're very unhealthy for you. And of course, the reason Yahweh chose, get this in your mind, Melchizedek, the one sent, taught Abraham the laws. And because Abraham kept my laws, my statutes, and my judgment, because he believed the one sent, and he kept those laws, then Yahweh chose him to bring forth the Savior, who is the unblemished, unspotted Passover lamb that died for us. You can't find one now, but you certainly could find one at one time, several of them at one time. You can't find them now, and I want you to know why. And I'm anxious for you to see that. But the sickness, brethren, throughout the world is getting worse. I've got gobs of articles on that. The hatred, I don't know if you get to see the news or not, or if you watch the news, but the hatred is building all over the world. The wars are getting worse. They're saying, I almost hate to quote this, but they're getting ready to attack Iran, and they're saying, you remember back when they said Iraq could have a nuclear bomb in 6 months? Well, now they're saying the same thing about Iran. And I'm going to wait till later on this, the next time I speak. But it's very interesting to see what's taking place with the quartet and how the war took place right after the 9/11, and of course we have the history and the dates on it, and of course the quartet was invented and it given power. Well, that's what Yahweh shows us, of course. But Yahweh has protection. He has protection, and what makes this feast the most important feast? Have you figured it out yet? because we need that protection, and we need it right now. That's why. The horrors are here. The nightmares are here. The sickness, the disease, the wars, the hatred. It's all here. Turn over to Colossians, because this is speaking of Yahweh's feast, and that's the reason I told the men, we need to establish this in everyone's mind. This is going to be the greatest feast, or the most important feast in the 6,000 years of man's history. This is it. Well, here in Colossians, Of course, the King James Version, you can figure this out from the King James Version, but you can also be deceived by the King James Version here if you let yourself be deceived, because the ones that wrote the King James Version, before they wrote it, they were working in Jeremiah's time, and Jeremiah said, "You're writing it wrong." And this is what he told the priest, that the ruthless priest that had taken over, and remember, they weren't like Yeshua. Yeshua was not ruthless, and this they couldn't understand. They thought he was going to be a mighty killer, and that he is going to have a big sword, strapped on each side, and maybe one's back here on his back somewhere too, and some hidden ones throughout under his armors and so forth. And he was going to kill all their enemies for them. Well, Yeshua said he wouldn't even follow this kind of junk, because he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword. I don't see anyone living in the wars that don't also die in the wars. Today, it's the same thing today. But start here with verse 4. He says, "Now I say this, so that no one deceives you." Well, of course, he is dealing with the same thing then. The apostles were dealing with the same things then that the house of Yahweh has been dealing with since Yahweh established his house in Abelin in forgot what year, but since he established his house. Deceive you with persuasive words. So he's going right off to begin with to set them up so they won't be deceived. This is what Yeshua did with his disciples. He taught them this in advance. Do you know why that your children keep the Sabbath when the Christians don't? It's because they're taught. They're taught to keep the Sabbath. Now, if you think about this with everything that you don't want in your child, then use that information and start teaching your children. If you teach a child, he will do what you want him to do. I've never found a child, I've never seen a child in my life that didn't want to please his parents, unless they taught him to be rebellious. Yes, and this is what you can teach them. I've seen people leave the house of Yahweh and start, the man and his wife who got their feelings hurt because they were corrected by one of the leaders, and they went off teaching others to be rebellious. Most of the time, that's pretty easy done in a young child's mind. They're very easy to persuade. So when you talk against an elder or a supervisor, and you're saying this in front of children, naturally you're teaching your children. And that's not what you're supposed to do, to be a builder of the house of Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh is choosing. He's choosing builders of the house of Yahweh, not destruction. He can get demolition from every corner of the world. Look at it. It's everywhere. It's nuclear now, getting stronger than nuclear. They even got them that'll penetrate bunkers and concrete. 18 foot of concrete this thing will go through. Yahweh had that power before then. He's speaking, he's wanting people like Yeshua to build the house of Yahweh with peace, to build peace. If you get angry when you're corrected, and you start carrying a grudge, and you develop a brood of bitterness, this is a dishonor. This test becomes a dishonor to you instead of an honor. What if Yeshua, what if Abraham first had gone to Baal and said, you know, they're wanting me, Melchizedek over there at that place, he's wanting me to kill my son. Now, tell me, should I do this? Oh, Lord, no. Well, them guys over there think they know everything. You know, they don't know nothing. Come and get in our school of higher learning. We'll teach you how to do and how to train your child. And he can make you a bunch of money and take care of you all of your life till you're old. Take care of you till your grave. Well, that's it. That's what they teach. That's all they teach. That's the reason they're called worthless. But what if Abraham had done this? What if Yahshua had done this? What if if his parents had taught him to rebel? He would have rebelled. The fact is, he was taught. He was actually taught that the priests are taught. They're giving you the information straight from Yahweh. And Yahweh even names the one sent, you know. He says you don't have to worry about that either. He names it and shows where the work will be and everything. Well, here he starts off, the apostle starts off here with showing them, don't be deceived because people are going to try to deceive you. Yes, at that time, there were many that were keeping the feast, but they were keeping it wrong. And the apostles were correcting them and saying, you're not keeping this correctly. And then, in Yahshua's memorial, the same thing. He said, this is not keeping Yahweh's feast. This is not keeping Yahshua's memorial. This is not what the way he taught you to do this. And of course, every time Yahshua would correct people and show the scriptures, then many would fall away. And pretty soon they'd all left him except the 12, remember? That didn't stop him. You know, Yahshua was grounded in the truth, and before he finished with his disciples, they were too. And they stayed with it even to the death. This was a great honor for the disciples, that they were willing to do such a thing. Yochanan was willing too. Yochanan, the one that actually wrote Revelations, he was willing to die. He would have died without changing, and Yahweh knew this. And he's the one that wrote for us Revelations also. Well, now at verse 5, even though I am absent in the flesh, yet I am with you in the spirit, rejoicing to see from you the order and the steadfastness of your faith in the Messiah. Now, this is not an empty faith. This is what we've been teaching now for years. We've got to be like the Messiah. We've got to believe into that person. Be like the teacher. You get that? Well, some people were showing this. They were showing, yes, he was steadfast. Messiah, the Yahshua Messiah, he's king and priest over the house of Yahweh. He's not king and priest over any of the churches. The house of Yahweh that is prophesied, he's the one, he's king and priest over that house only. Praise Yahweh. And he says, therefore now, get this, therefore, just as you have received Yahshua Messiah, our head, so walk as he walked, or walk as he, taking root to build the house of Yahweh through him. And also, now through him, well, you could interpret this yourself in 1,000 different ways. But Yahshua shows how you come to him through as donkeys tied to the bush. And if you're not tied to the bush, you're not part of Yahshua himself here. I'm the vine, you are the branches, he said. And then he says, this branch, the donkeys in the last days, and he even demonstrated this when he was lowly and rode a donkey. And he made his witness do the same thing. Praise Yahweh. Well, I know what it is to tether my donkey to a post or vine or whatever. And that's exactly what the apostle was talking about here, taking root to build the house of Yahweh through him. That is, through Yeshua Messiah, whose prophesied work in Genesis, even in Genesis, his prophesied work for the last days started in Genesis and comes clear through to Revelations. All through Revelations is Yeshua. Yeshua's prophesied work that's withered to the branch, or tied to the branch where it won't come loose. And also being established in the faith as you have been taught now, abound not by the churches now, but been taught in the house of Yahweh. As you've been taught. What does Deuteronomy say? Go to the priest. Then Yahweh says, go to the one of the tribes where I choose, and so forth. And there you'll be taught, and don't go to the left or the right. And if you don't go to the left or right, this will be counted in your honor as the very fact that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. Abounding in it with thanksgiving, praising Yahweh that you were able to go through this test and have this honor written about you in heaven. Now, beware, since you're in the house now, beware that no one leads you away like a prize. This is what the great apostle Shaul was saying when he said, oh, there's a lot of men out there that seem righteous, and they're teaching the laws to some extent, but not to the fullest extent where if persecution comes, they run the other way. But they're not willing to actually suffer and die for this message going out. Well, of course, the apostles were. And because of their previous unbelief, they were put to the end test, which was death. And they came through it. As far as I know, all of them came through except Isaac. But he says, beware that no man lead you away like a prize because of philosophy or empty false statements according to the traditions of men. Because of the traditions he's speaking of here, the traditions is some of the things that were written wrong, that the prophet Jeremiah says, you have written this wrong. And from you, this falsehood is going out. And he said, Yahweh did not send these priests that are writing this wrong. Traditions of men, and from these traditions, we get many of these things. We've inherited many of these things in the King James and other translations. And of course, it's in ours too. It's in this book of Yahweh. The difference with us and King James, we're working to get it out. If it doesn't fit the plan, we know it doesn't belong there. Traditions of men after the elements of the world and not after the Messiah. And you can get carried off in 1,000 different directions by taking something that you shouldn't have never went there in the first place to get. I want to go, where do we want to go? Look at verse 11 now. In him you were also circumcised with the circumcision that was made according to the law and the prophets, then putting off the body of sin of the flesh by the circumcision of the Messiah. Now, here you have a physical circumcision, and then, of course, the circumcision of putting the sin, taking the sin out of your body, getting rid of it, and believing Yeshua, believing what he did, how he kept the Sabbath. That's one of the things how he kept the Sabbath, how he was a continual servant to the people. That's the other thing. That's what's going to bring peace to the universe, is Yahweh's law teaches service and love to others. No unselfishness. Now, verse 16 now, because this is what he's leading up to here in the deception. He says, "Therefore, let no man," after all of this, he brought you all of this so he could say, verse 16, he brought you this about the deception, how we've got to follow Yeshua. We've got to believe in Yeshua. We've got to believe that he fulfilled those prophecies. We've got to believe that his apostles saw and witnessed what went on and wrote for us as witnesses. This is all shown in the Holy Scriptures. From the beginning it's shown that we've got to believe this. I don't know why you shouldn't. Is there something out there anywhere that anyone can find that is better some way? No! Right. No is right. "Therefore, let no man condemn you for eating and drinking in the observance of a feast day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath." Because, of course, the world condemns us for keeping the Sabbath and the feast days. Many have been accused and falsely accused and condemned. Some are even suffering imprisonment for this. This has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. The first righteous priest was killed, Abel, for teaching this very thing, that you've got to keep Yahweh's laws. Now, he says, "which are a shadow from things to come for the body of Messiah." Shadow from things to come for the body of Messiah. The shadow. Now, he's saying this is a shadow from things to come. If you turn over, let's read all of this first. "Let no man deprive you of your reward." Well, Yahweh says there is great reward, even eternal life, in keeping these days, these appointments with Yahweh. If you think of these Sabbaths, each feast day, as an appointment with Yahweh, you think of rejoicing in Yahweh without alcohol this feast. You're rejoicing in the Spirit itself. Praise Yahweh. Everybody said last night they enjoyed the supper and this much more because they didn't see certain things going on that we have had to suffer in the past from alcohol and of course the misuse of alcohol. If alcohol was drink as if it was used, wine, beer, whiskey, whatever, if it was used the way Yahweh tells you to use it, it would be fine. It would be healthy. The problem is the abuse of this. And this is what causes the problems. It causes you to look like a fool, causes you to do foolish things, or maybe you just use that as an excuse to do it. But anyway, I was so pleased that everyone, I know that some refused to come because of that, I'm hearing, but that's their dishonor, I'm glad it wasn't your dishonor. I'm glad this was counted to you as honor. Well, they can deprive you of your reward if you go to them, if you listen to them. If you listen to them above the 1 cent, they'll deprive you of salvation. Doing it on purpose, but as though in humility of mind, through the religious worship of God's Elohim. And now if you take this right here and you go back to the prophets with it, you know the prophets was the one, that is the false prophets of Jerusalem that took over Jerusalem and went to prophesying for the kings. Of course, they prophesied falsely to the king, but the false prophets were the ones that worshiped the gods, or Elohim, and that's where the word came from. And when they took the name out and put the Elohim in there in its stead, which you know this from Jeremiah's writing, but also from the way it's written in the many other books, and the way that that it was originally written was with Yahweh exclusively, and then they added the word El and Elohim as they turned and got control of the copying and copies. Praise Yahweh, He didn't allow them to have them all, because we had proof that they were not in the original, and proof that is forever recorded for us. And of course, Yahweh Himself brought this to light, as He's bringing certain things to light now against the people, these people that took over the priesthood at that time and defiled the priesthood at that time, and of course wrote the things wrong that we are having to deal with at this time. But they use these words, and he says, intruding into things they did not know nor understand, being puffed up by their own carnal minds, and not holding firmly. Being puffed up by their own carnal minds, but not holding firmly now to the one sent, as Yahshua added those words for you, not holding firmly to the one sent, to the head from whom all the body, nourished, united as joints and ligaments, growing with the increase from Yahweh Himself. So Yahweh said, I will establish my house in prophecy. Then He says this is going to bring the perfection. And then it said He's going to bring it through Yahshua, us tied to Him, the chief cornerstone. But our foundation would be both the prophets, the writing of the prophets, and the writing of the apostles. The foundation of the prophets and apostles, with Yahshua holding up this building strong, never to fall into deception. Now that's His promise to you. How could you go wrong believing that? Well, now, we're in Colossians, and I should have just read, that's fine, but let's go back to verse 16 now. He says, therefore, let no man condemn you for eating and drinking in the observance of a feast day, or a new moon, or of the Sabbath day, which are a shadow from things to come for the body of Messiah. If you look at the references there, you'll see we show you the proof where the King James was wrong, and the authoritative books say this is the way the word is correctly translated. So it's not like we don't have proof, but let's turn over to Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16 now. Deuteronomy 16. And start here with verse 1. Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. He says, watch for the new moon of green ears. Watch for the new moon of green ears of barley. Sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Father. For in the moon of green ears of barley, Yahweh your Father brought you out of Egypt by night. Therefore you must sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Father from the flock and from the herd at the place Yahweh chooses to establish His name. At the place where Yahweh chooses to establish His name. That was done. You must eat no leavened bread with it, but the 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. So you may remember the day. Get this now, don't leave this part out. Get it in your mind. It's very important that you remember this. So you may remember the day you set out from the land of Egypt all the days of your life. No leavening shall be seen among you. I hope you got the leavening out of your houses. Some people find it the next year. I said, I think you're buying too much baking powder. You know, you keep it a year and don't even know you got it. Maybe you should just get the amounts you need. Baking powder is pretty easy to make, by the way, and you can keep the ingredients and mix up your own baking powder if you want to do that, but that's the best way to do it. There's another thing that people, they always try to cheat on Yahweh's laws. Well, this is to their dishonor. You know, you can take egg whites and you can beat it up into bread and make leavened bread, you know, but you don't use the leavening. But you forget the law that you're not supposed to have any leavened bread. You know, if you make that leavened bread, you've still broke the law, even though you used egg whites instead of leavening, baking powders or yeast. You still got the leavened bread. You understand that? So you know, that's just one of the ways that people, they want to retain sin in their lives. And Yeshua says they love darkness rather than light. Well, this is a attribute of mankind that lies at your door, as Yahweh told Cain, but you must overcome it. No leaven shall be seen now among you in all your territory for 7 days, nor shall any of the meat you sacrificed on the evening before the first day remain overnight until the morning. You shall not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates. Yahweh your Father has given you. It's got to be done at the place. This was the law. It must be done, or you're breaking the law. It must be done in the House of Yahweh gates, which is this 44 area right here, and the land that Yahweh gives us here, and chose to set His name here, but only at the place, notice, Yahweh your Father chooses to establish His name. There you must sacrifice the Passover at evening at the going down of the sun at the season you came out of Egypt. Remember these laws now. Every one of these laws must be kept. I don't have time to go into the ones who actually performed this. The night that, let me call it to your remembrance though right quick for you. This first lamb that was sacrificed and the blood put on the doorpost, that was done in the land of Goshen, and that was where it was commanded. That was never done again, brethren. Not ever. And it's stupid when we don't get all of this in our mind, when we just take a tiny bit of it and run with it. But you get this when you don't depend on me and the answers that Yahweh gives you. If you believe the one sent, you'll know I am studying this stuff diligently. I'm writing on it. I want to get into the kingdom myself. And I want everyone in this house to get there with me. But after that one time, that was it. Afterwards, Yahweh set priests. He set a Levitical priesthood. And this was the purpose for the Levitical priesthood that came 400 and something years after the original laws were given. And then those priests, they had laws to follow before they could even touch a lamb. If a person touched a lamb and he wasn't certified to touch that lamb, he was under a penalty of death. And Yahweh called some of them to death, that is, the death angel did, Because they were so ignorant, they did not bother to learn the law or to believe the one sent, which was Moshe, who was teaching them. They didn't consecrate themselves, they didn't cleanse themselves, and they offered what Yahweh says was strange fire on his altar. That was also the law to offer this Passover unblemished sacrificial lamb. Get this in your head. Don't let it leave it again. I brought all this before, but I'm bringing it again. But it's in my past books. The past books I've written. It's in the past sermons. There's no excuse for you not knowing these things. But these priests, they had to be perfect in order to bring that lamb to that altar and to sacrifice the lamb. It couldn't be done out in the gates like it was in Goshen in Egypt. You gotta take the whole thing. You came out of Goshen. You came out of Egypt. You're now with the Levitical priesthood. And the Levitical priesthood has been given to guide you. Now, what did Yahweh say about this generation? If you haven't forgotten that, he said, I have dissolved the Levitical priesthood. Remember? Because your first father sinned and your interpreters lied to you. Well, but he says, so I will dissolve the Levitical priesthood. Going down of the sun. Now, on the verse 7 now. And you shall roast and eat it in the place Yahweh your father chooses, which was under the Levitical priesthood and with the tabernacle in the wilderness. And of course, before that now, if you remember, or maybe I haven't brought that in the last few years, but I think I brought it the other night, that Abraham was actually told to go and sacrifice his son. And he was told to go to the very place where Yahweh actually sacrificed his son. To that place. And Abraham was told there, and he told Isaac, Yahweh will provide the lamb for this sacrifice. Speaking, of course, of Yahshua Messiah, if you didn't get that. Isaac was only a type of that. And Yahweh did provide that lamb. That's the reason we read in 1 Corinthians 5:7, and we've got to believe it. If we don't, we're just plain stupid. Yahshua is our Passover lamb, sacrificed for us on that mountain on the very time that Daniel said he would be. Daniel himself is included in all of this, and his prophecies. Daniel was one sent, by the way. So was Jeremiah. And you shall roast it and eat it in the place Yahweh your father chooses, and in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. All of these are in this law now, every one of it. 6 days you must eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation. To Yahweh your father you must do no work. Well, if we believe that like it's written right there, then you can't move a finger on your body, because that's work. Can't bat your eyelids. Well, even if you try not to, that's work. Try not to bat your eyelids. Shut your eyes and see how long you can keep them there. You know, it's written wrong. And of course, we got worse translations now, because they took what was written wrong and made it wronger. And if Yahweh hadn't have given me understanding, then it would still be wrong. And nobody here would be sitting here today. You should praise Yahweh. Now, here's your test. You should rejoice in what I'm telling you. You should praise Yahweh that I'm trying to keep you from dying. Praise God. because you shall rejoice in this. You should be rejoicing right now that I'm doing this. Rejoice in front of Yahweh, because Yahweh is the one that's guiding this, as He prophesied in advance, starting in Genesis, that He would be guiding this right now. This work right now, this work. And the work is that you believe, if you want to be a part of the work, you believe in the one sent. Then you won't go wrong. And He's promised you that. You shall rejoice in front of Yahweh your Father, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your daughter and your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite who lives within your gates, the stranger, the fatherless, the widows among you, at the place Yahweh your Father chooses to establish His name. Now, of course, on this right here, you can't just take this right here, because Yahweh says everyone who eats, partakes of the Passover, or does it in the remembrance of this day, as He said. You must be circumcised, your males must be circumcised, and you must keep the law. Otherwise, you won't be able to partake or come to partake of Yeshua's memorial or Yahweh's memorial. And you must remember that you might keep that in mind and try to rectify that if it's not already done. Verse 13, you must observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. This is an appointment with Yahweh. Verse 14, you shall rejoice at your feast. Rejoice, thou shalt rejoice. The wives too, your sons, your daughters, your manservant. Now, not rejoicing, singing worldly songs, listening to worldly songs is not rejoicing in Yahweh. That's rejoicing in Satan. To rejoice in Yahweh, you need to be studying, you need to be working, taking care of others, doing work that brings a blessing to others. You know, serving meals is one of the most beautiful things that a person can do. Yeshua did it. Yeshua Himself did it. The other day, I went over to take the grape juice to the cafeteria and find a place to set it up to where the people could see it. It's a grape juice called sparkling grape juice, and it tastes like champagne. It's really a great taste. Many of us had it for Passover last night, but we had it available to everyone. But I saw I saw the people there working, and I was so joyous, you know. It just I said, and sweat, and they were so joyous when I walked in, and then I went over to another place, and here was the same thing, and I said, man, this is the most joyous place on earth. I've never seen people so joyous about doing work. Well, that is things that I used to read about in the Scriptures, and I thought, I saw the drudgery of man's activities, and I worked on construction gangs. I never saw this kind of joy, and in fact, it was something that was not desirable in their lives. They wanted to hurry and get off. They looked for quitting time and payday, and that's about it. They couldn't care less about this stupid job that they were doing. But here, it's totally a different thing. Not only are you proving yourselves as honorable in Yahweh's eyes, but you're loving it, and He's loving it. I'm loving it when I see it. And I saw this, and I realized, that this was things that I used to read about, and I marveled at it when I read about it, how joyous His disciples were, and how each time this took place, the only time there was ever not joy was when there was disruption by someone who didn't want to overcome or be a servant to others, where there's this build-up attitude of wanting to be served or wanting to be a ruler or something like that. But here you rejoice now in front of Yahweh, which means He's there with the maidservants, the men servants, the strangers, the fatherless, the widows in your cities. 7 days you must keep a joyous feast to Yahweh. Remember that. 7 days now. You must keep this joyous feast. Keep this up. You can make yourself do it. If you're the other way, it means you've been trained to hate your work. Now we're training you to love being a servant to others. That's the difference in us and the world. Praise Yahweh. At the place now He will choose, for Yahweh your Father will bless you in all your income and in all the work of your hands, so you will surely have joy. 3 times a year all your males shall appear. Now, this is left out something because we just read all your wives, your children, your manservants, maidservants. But here now it just says all your males. And I've seen people jump on that and say, well, I'm not supposed to bring my wife and family. So they come along in front of Yahweh your Father at the place. That's their mentality. That's as far as they could see is that one line. Place He will choose, and it's always Yahweh who chooses this place, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Tabernacles, and they must not appear in front of Yahweh empty-handed. No, they've got to bring offerings, tithe, and so forth. Every man shall give as he is capable of giving, in proportion to the blessing Yahweh your Father has given you. Now, this here now, it's been broken sometimes, and I have the hardest time getting people to understand. As Malachi said, you must bring all your tithe, all of your offerings into the house of Yahweh. I know people want to, as the psychology books teach you, the reason a person jumps in the water and saves somebody's life is not because he loved that person and wanted to save that person's life. Especially if he doesn't know the person. It's because of the honor he'll receive or the dishonor if he's capable of doing it and doesn't do it. Now, this is what psychology teaches you. The same thing is in every person, they say. They want to be honored. They want to be highly thought of and praised. They want to be a hero. Well, of course, it's altogether different. You serve because Yahweh says this brings joy, and Yahshua said if you do this, then joyous are you. But you got to do it first. If you do it, then you're joyous. You learn to have joy. So you practice it here for 7 days. And then if you go home, you'll find yourself wanting to do this at home too. Wanting to bring blessings to others, whether it's a little child or a grown-up, somebody you know, somebody you don't know. Then it becomes a habit with you, and you find joy in doing this. And this is what Yahshua was talking about. He didn't come to teach us to rule. He came to teach us to serve. He came as a servant. You must appoint judges and officers in all the cities Yahweh your Father gives you. Well, that's going into something else, and my time is up, I know. And we got up to Deuteronomy now, 16. That's as far as we got. Y'all remember that. We just barely got started in this subject. I've got so much to bring, but I think we can cover the most of it. But I do want to get into this prophecy too. So I know some of the elders are going to bring a great deal on this. Tomorrow morning, don't miss tomorrow morning. The great David Yahuda is going to show you many of the mistakes that we are correcting and have corrected, just like the ones we've corrected already. The King James Version, because of the way God worshipers wrote it, and some of them, the manuscripts. Now, the manuscripts we go by, there's several. And, of course, what you'll find in the Vulgate, you might not find in another. But Yahweh gave us several. So normally, the majority won't make the same mistake or won't write it differently, write it wrong. Now, I'm not saying now the Vulgate is the one you should trust in. I didn't say that. But we use them all in our work. And, of course, you have to know the plan, too. You have to see Yahweh's plan, and you have to see it for each generation. And what each generation, the way each generation is commanded, actually what is laid upon that generation to do. And, of course, if you didn't know this, there's no way you could find these mistakes. But the ones that brought the Elohim and so forth into the Holy Scriptures, they also polluted Yahweh's Sabbath day. And they made it a thing of dishonor. You know, it's a total selfishness, the way they want to do it. They want to lay down and be waited on. And of course, when Yahshua came, he kept the Sabbath correctly. He waited on everyone around him. He served them. Praise Yahweh. I never once read where he was unjoyous about this at all. So if you practice this, and here's the place to start practicing it. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!